I am Kumudini Pati, an independent researcher associated with the Center for Women's Studies, University of Allahabad, and we are taking up the subject of women's studies. This is paper number 12 and this is module 4, Women in Science Education in India. Now, when we are discussing science education in the country, we see that girl students have been discriminated against, be it school final exams or undergraduate education or higher education. In terms of performance, girls come out as toppers and they almost invariably show better pass percentage compared to boys. But unfortunately, their share in total enrollment in education, especially in higher education and in science education, remains very low. Now, why does this happen? Naturally, one would be curious to know what reasons are there behind this kind of a state of affairs. Now, there are several hurdles which women have to face when they are going for science education. Women are equally competent in advancing in the field of science education in India, but they do face several hurdles which are mostly extra academic. Forget equality with men. In fact, the very entry of women into the portals of education remains a long struggle. And even the women pioneers in education, in spite of their having done so much and have been working on the study of natural phenomenon, this remains a stark reality in India. Women scientists in ancient India have been quite well known, and we see that in ancient India, Gargi and Maitri were acknowledged as natural philosophers of repute. In the 12th century, Leelavati, the daughter of the Indian mathematician Bhaskaracharya, was a mathematician and natural philosopher in her own right. Bhaskara had written a book on algebra and he had named it after his daughter. But one really wonders, why is it that Leelavati has never authored a book on mathematics or science herself? Now, when you see what the women scientists have been doing in India, we see that in the medieval period, women's education as such in India had taken a back seat. Imparting formal education to females actually began during the British rule in India. High schools for girls were established for imparting modern education. And because of that, initially we saw a very few number of girls being enrolled. These social, religious prejudices had obstructed women's education initially. It was only very gradually that formal education for women gained popularity, and then the issues of tertiary education and professional participation of women also started coming up. Now, how did women come into the field of medicine? You would be very curious to know. Actually, the conservative practice of segregation of Indian women actually made it possible for women to come into medical science as doctors. It is very surprising that qualified women doctors were actually needed because the women patients were not being treated by the male doctors because of some kind of prejudice or some kind of a conservative practice. The Madras Medical College had admitted a few girl students in 1875 for a certificate course in medicine, so that they could treat these female patients who were quite averse to being treated by the male doctors. Then came the Dufferin Fund. In 1885, Lady Dufferin established the National Association for Supplying female medical aid to the women of India. It was referred to as the Dufferin Fund, and it helped start medical training programs for women, and it started sponsoring women who wanted to train as doctors, nurses or other medical professionals. Then universities also started opening their gates to science study. Science courses came into some of the universities, and the All India Women's Education Conference raised a fund which established the first domestic science college for women in India. This was the Lady Irwin College in 1932. This was established in Delhi. Slowly and often very grudgingly, the universities of India, especially Calcutta, allowed the admission of female students into different courses of science. Now, what was the government doing? If you see the role of the government, the first 4 5-year plans did not devote any specific attention to promote women in science education. And it was only in 1974, when the Towards Equality report came, that it was for the first time revealed how women had been conveniently bypassed by the planners. There was a National Commission of Women's Education which had been started in 1970, which had stressed greater participation of women in education, but it did not pay any exclusive attention to education of women in the sciences. Now, we will study some of the facts which have been related to women's study in the science stream. In 2005, there were 1902 women's colleges in India, and in the second half of the 20th century, the percentage of women students in universities almost doubled. Among all the university students, only about 40% are women even today. Around 39% of the seats in science faculties in institutions of higher education are occupied by women. This is a very small number considering the fact that lots of efforts have been going on to encourage science education in India. Now, the gross enrollment ratio for women in higher education remained single digit number for all major states in India in 2001 and 2. Only by 2006 and 7, the situation improved slightly in some of the states. Now, paradoxically, the more industrially advanced a state is, like for example, if you see the example of Karnataka and Tamil Nadu, you will see that the gender divide is greater. So, these industrially advanced states show that although they are advanced by way of progress in industrialization, the same does not hold for higher education. Only Himachal Pradesh is better off as far as the percentage of girls in higher education is concerned, and the percentage of girls exceeds that of boys in higher education in Himachal Pradesh. Women students are a minority in the science based courses like agriculture, veterinary science, engineering and technology even today. Now, in the discipline of education, women's enrollment surpasses that of men, and in liberal arts and medicines, you will also see higher proportions of women than in other science disciplines. Only 30% of the science research projects funded by the Department of Science and Technology were headed by principal investigators who were women in 2010. Also, there is some kind of a gender stereotyping in science education. There is a greater social acceptability of some courses of study in science as being more appropriate for women. you can say that it is some kind of a gender stereotyping in the sphere of education. For example, you will find that in the discipline of education and the discipline of medicine, there are more women, because this agrees with the conventional role of women as teachers, as nurturers and caregivers. Study of liberal arts is also deemed to be more suitable for women. It is argued that arts and humanities require attributes which are inherently possessed by women. The ability to fantasize, to delve deep into aesthetics and intuitive philosophical questions and nuances of languages. So, it is not surprising when we see that only 44% of girl students are enrolled in the undergraduate arts courses as compared to about 39% in science in 2004 and 2005. Now, we see that 64% of female students were enrolled for the BSc courses in a highly literate state like Kerala in the year 2000-2001, as compared to only 21% in Bihar. And also we see that the share of women progressively comes down as we move higher within various levels of higher education. And this we can see in a table which is about enrollment in arts and science at 3 levels: the undergraduate, the postgraduate and the research level. So, we see the enrollment of girls in arts and science. In the undergraduate, in the arts courses, there are 44.2% girls. In the postgraduate level, 44.6% girls, and at the research level, it goes down to 38.6% only. And we see in science, it is less than in arts. The percentage becomes less, that is 39% only in undergraduate, 42.5% in postgraduate and 37.2% in the research level. So, we are naturally concerned about how this state of affairs is going to be changed. How are we going to break the barriers that lie before women's education in the sciences? First of all, there are physical barriers. The nearest school or college which offers good quality science education might be quite far off from the place of residence. There may be unavailability of transport or having to commute long distances by crowded public transport, and these may also act as deterrents. Exclusive hostels for girls may not be available even at many district headquarters, let alone the taluka or the block headquarters. Security for women in the women's hostels in many small towns still remains a big issue, and parents are really concerned about how they are going to ensure the security of girls who have gone out for higher studies. Girls from scheduled caste and scheduled tribe backgrounds also face discrimination in the general girls' hostels, whereas exclusive hostels for SC and ST girls are few. Actually, there are a very minuscule number. Lack of security in girls' hostel at distant taluk or district headquarters also deter the parents from sending their daughters to remote areas to pursue education in science. And here I can give an example of a case that took place in January 2017, where a girl belonging to a Dalit family from Hajipur of Bihar was gang raped while she was studying and living in a hostel. The hostel was being financed by the government, and you can imagine This girl, Dika Kumari was her name. Her body was found outside the hostel and there was nobody to answer how she had been raped and killed. Now, besides this, there are also economic barriers. For example, there is a financial crunch in the families which is reinforced by cultural biases. And this forces many families to spend less money on the daughter's education than on the son's, because they think that whatever investment goes into the daughter's education will finally not be of any use to their own family. Rather, it would be an investment in the in-laws' family. Most families are also averse to funding professional science education for their daughters because it becomes more expensive than the education in arts or commerce. Now, what are the financial incentives which the government has offered till now? The promotional measures and financial incentives extended by the union government at present focus on higher enrollment and retention of girls in school education, and at the level of higher education, it is limited to offering scholarships and fee waivers only for the single girl child. A scheme was launched in September 2005 by CBSE and UGC for total fee waiver except the transportation and cost of food for the single girl child and 50% waiver for 2 girl children from class 6 to class 12. But this scheme was revised, and in March 2006 it was reduced for 3 years only for private schools and from class 6 only up to class 8. The finance minister also in his budget announcement of 2006 and 7 had declared 1,000 new residential schools for girls from SC, ST, OBC and minority communities, which would be opened in 2006 and 7 under the Kasturba Gandhi Balika Vidyalaya scheme, and 300 crore rupees had been provided for that. That was a welcome step indeed. But the government has not come up with any kind of matching initiative to promote participation of women in science education, especially in professional courses like engineering, in medicine, and for promoting women in doctoral and postdoctoral research. Now, we discuss the Maulana Azad National Scholarship. The Union Government of India is extending the Maulana Azad National Scholarship for girls in both school education and college education, wherein as an assistance 12,000 rupees per year is given uniformly, granted irrespective of any differences in the level of education. But the applicant should have secured a minimum of 55% marks in aggregate. Girls from poor Muslim background complained that they are being deprived of this scholarship because of this, that they are not able to perform so well. Now, there is also a Begum Hazrat Mahal National Scholarship for meritorious girl students. This scheme is supposed to target students from minority background, but this is offered only to students in educational institutions that are recognized by the government. And a large number of girls who are studying in madrasas have been excluded from the purview of this scholarship. Also, we see a growing commercialization of education, and because of commercialization, education is becoming more and more expensive. The better education you want, the better you have to pay for it. So, growing commercialization of education robs many poor girls of their educational opportunities. In the reputed government engineering and medical colleges, which are very few in number, considering the growing number of girl students trying to take admission, the merit remains so high that only a very small section of girl students are able to get in. Then comes the National Postdoctoral Fellowship. Only in 2016, as late as 2016, the Union government has launched the National Postdoctoral Fellowship to fund all the pure science scholars who are holding a PhD degree. All the scholars are paid a basic funding of 7 lakhs per year for doing research and 50,000 per month for a period of 3 years. Now, the biggest problem which is associated with these kinds of promotional measures by the government for the women is that the potential beneficiaries, that the women themselves actually are not aware of these schemes at all, and neither the schools nor the colleges give him or her this kind of information. Then there is also gender discrimination in the higher education that we see in our country. For example, instead of formal sciences for girls, home science becomes a very important subject. A paucity of women teachers and research guides in the sciences is also very discouraging for young girls. Now, there is a Kishore Vaigyanik Protsahan Yojana which have been started, and this is for young budding science students, but it does not offer any special benefits to girl students. So, we can say that at the level of policy, something has to be done to address this kind of gender discrimination. Now, the National Policy on Education of 1986, as way back as 86, it was recommended that at least 50% of all teachers recruited in the future should be women. But unfortunately, till date, this has not been followed rigorously. Women are recruited mostly as guest lecturers, probationers, para teachers, and they are made to work in such capacities for long periods of time and paid very meagerly. And I will tell you that this happens mostly because the women somehow feel that they want to stay in the place where their spouse is working. So, the spouse or the husband becomes the main bread earner for the family, and the woman's income is considered like some kind of a supplementary income for the family. And so, the woman is satisfied with a smaller salary than what she actually deserves. Now, the program of action of 1992 had referred to the non-availability of mathematics and science teachers in girls' school, and the problem continues till date. Especially when you go to the rural areas, you will see that rural schools and colleges will have very few mathematics and science teachers in the girls' schools. The national policy for empowerment of women came in 2001. This had also mandated the development of gender sensitive curricula at all educational levels. And the NCERT was supposed to review all the textbooks, even the science curriculum, to remove all kinds of sections which had gender insensitive text or portrayals, and to make the curriculum really gender sensitive. But this has not been followed till date. The biggest problem that we are facing today is the issue of harassment, especially by the teachers and research guides, and this is actually sexual harassment. There have been several instances of sexual harassment of women students in institutions of higher education. Why does this happen? It is actually the control that the guide or the teacher has on the students. The funding, the signatures on papers, everything depends on the guides and the teachers. And if they really decide to harass the woman has really very little option to opt out. Now, many universities still do not have functional internal complaints committee. A voluntary organization which has come up in 1973, that is the Indian Women's Science Association, it is IWSA. This has taken up the cause of women scientists, and now it is working seriously all over the country to get the women scientists together and do something about this gender discrimination that we see in science education in the country. Thank you.